Okay, the next question is, you have moved the action in Leave the Girls Behind to our own fair land of Aotearoa. What drove that decision, and can you talk us through writing about place using a location as a character, so to speak? So during lockdown, I wrote a manuscript. This was after Before You Knew My Name, and I had set that entirely in New Zealand. And I don't really need to tell anybody about how lockdown was for us in New Zealand. The strange mix of being locked down, but also unless you were in Auckland for most of the time, we had a relative amount of freedom, and that story that I was writing in that period really reflected that kind of that claustrophobia and also strangeness of, am I really going about everyday real life while our borders are closed and while there's this pandemic raging across the planet. And ultimately, when I got to the end of that manuscript, I realized it wasn't a story that I had wanted to tell. It was a story that I'd felt that I needed to explore at that time, rather kind of like a diary or something like that. So I actually scrapped that manuscript and started what then became Leave the Girls Behind. What I did was I took the town of Marama River that I had created in this first manuscript and I dropped that town into the story. But because the world was opening up again, I also wanted to open up the world for my characters. And it was a lot of fun to have New Zealand as a character. I do think of landscape as a character. New York is the obvious one. I think that she plays a part in my novels that is as important as any of the protagonists. She's the impetus, the reason that things happen. And so with New Zealand, it was just really nice to be able to write about a small town that I had made up and that I had spent a lot of time with back in lockdown in another context, and then taking that landscape, taking that really evocative, kind of moody, somewhat Jurassic landscape and dropping an American into it for a couple of days and really having fun with how this American Ruthie might relate to not only the landscape but also Kiwi teenage girls who grow up on farms and have a very different experience of life and independence than perhaps someone who grew up in the sort of cloistered Upper West Side of Manhattan. So I'll hopefully be able to include more of New Zealand into my writing moving forward, because now I live back there semi-permanently. And as I learn more about being an adult in New Zealand, because I left when I was 16, I feel much more confident about writing about New Zealand as a place, not just as the landscape, but as the people and the way that I now relate to being back in Aotearoa after leaving at 16 and now coming back in my 40s to a place that both feels incredibly familiar, but also quite new to me as well. Okay, the next question. Before You Knew My Name did not start off as a crime novel, but I take it that it wasn't the case this time around. Did you know it was going to be a crime novel from the get-go when writing Leave the Girls Behind? It's a great question. So yes, I did know that Leave the Girls Behind was going to be a crime novel. I had by then really embraced the genre that had embraced me. I had been lucky enough to win some crime writing awards I'm in Melbourne now, actually here in Melbourne, and back in New Zealand with the Ngaio Marsh Awards, and been nominated for other awards in both the UK and the US, and not that would influence my writing. It was more a validation, being nominated and sometimes winning those awards, that people were paying attention to the way that I was writing crime. And so if my challenging of tropes and my way of approaching this victim-centered narrative had been an accident of sorts with the first book. With Leave the Girls Behind, it was very deliberate. I set out to really learn about the tropes before I try to challenge them or break them or honor them. So there's a lot, and mentioned Easter eggs before. There's a lot of tropes and things that I'm playing with and Leave the Girls Behind, and sometimes I'm honoring them and sometimes I'm pulling back from them. And I think the biggest challenge with being conscious of that, rather than this happy accident of me just writing the story I was compelled to write with Before You Knew My Name. With Leave the Girls Behind, I am conscious, or I was conscious at writing, that there will be moments for crime readers where I'm setting you up for the sort of the big reveal or the moment, the beat, and then it doesn't happen because I'm pulling back and I'm staying true to my desire to write about heightened reality rather than what I call the mwahaha moments of, a villain sort of revealing their dastardly plan and everything escalates and then is resolved. Again, as much as I love reading books where that happens, that's not what I want to, at this stage at least, write. And so writing, it was a double-edged sword, I guess, like leaning into the crime genre and then knowing and feeling this responsibility of, well, how do I deliver on the promises of that genre and keep readers entertained, as well as stay true to my own my own motivations for writing in the first place, which is to shine a light into the darkest corners, and then to say that the what we see there is not just the worst moments that have happened to a person. So yeah, it's been a challenge, but I mean, I'm up for the challenge. I'm very lucky that I get to do this as a job, but I think that there's something really special about that first book that you write that nobody is waiting for in most cases, where you really don't have to think about those things and sort of get in your own way sometimes as you're creating a story. So that's for anybody who's an aspiring writer and hasn't finished that first novel yet. It's kind of like the first time you fall in love, in good love. First time you fall in good love. There's nothing like that first novel, and it will probably always be kind of your favorite. Okay, the next question. There are lots of red herrings in your books, in part with Leave the Girls Behind, in part because Ruth, whilst fabulous, thank you, is also unreliable. How do you go about plotting those red herrings in? See, when it comes to red herrings and when it comes to plot, let's just go with plot in general. I've never thought of myself as particularly good at plot. And an example I can give is if I'm watching a TV show, like an 8-part series, and then there's like the big reveal about, who committed a crime, I'll often be like, I don't get it. Like, what actually, what happened there? Who is that person? And I have to go back. Because I never really read mysteries as a kid. Oddly, actually, I didn't read any Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys or Famous Five, even though I read lots of Enid Blyton. I've never thought I was very good at reading and following plot, let alone writing my own. And so one of the things that I've done as a writer and with my red herring sort of, I need them to be organic. I need the writer's tricks to be the same kind of things that we tell ourselves in our own lives when we're making mistakes. So I mentioned earlier about just like when you don't believe in coincidence, for example, like my character Ruthie doesn't, then if something happens and you're gonna be like, oh, it's just a coincidence, it's just it's statistically, these kinds of things happen and they have no bearing on each other. Correlation, causation, all of those things. If you don't believe in that, if you think this only happened because of that, then that's a really easy way to set a character up to be wrong a lot of the time. So with my red herrings, it was not so much about consciously. No, it is about tricking the reader, but having fun with tricking the reader. But it's because the character is tricking themselves. They're not actually realizing or acknowledging their biases. And so it actually becomes a lot easier then to set up these mistakes. Because I think on the daily, we're all making judgments that aren't necessarily sound. They just tend not to be as consequential as some of those judgments my characters are making. But the other thing there is it's just so fun when you hit on something and you realize, oh, I know what to do here. Thank you, past me, as in author me who was writing stuff on the page that didn't kind of realize. So I don't really plot things out. Didn't really realize that I was laying the groundwork for this moment here. It's the best feeling in the world if I could bottle it. When you get to a scene and it all makes sense in a way that past you must have just been mulling over me, like maybe in your sleep or something. So yeah, I don't know if I could ever teach a writing class because so much of what I'm doing is organic, and as long as I'm staying true to that, this baseline of could this potentially happen in real life, and as the saying goes, like fiction, like what is it, like fact is often stranger than fiction. So I just stick to that, and then I just have fun with where I can take it. All right, the next question is, I believe your next book is provisionally called Believe You Me and will form a sort of trilogy with the first two. Are there any teasers you would like to share with us at this stage? So Believe You Me, I keep using that title in interviews and when I'm asked about it, at writers' festivals, because I'm very determined that will be the title of my third book. I love it. It's a phrase my dad used to use all the time when he would tell this outlandish story, and I think it really fits with the plot of what I'm working on. So I just keep saying that it is not provisionally, it is the title, but of course titles can change, and my publishers are probably rolling their eyes every time I use it, but I think they like it. I think they like it too. So as a sidebar, authors don't always get to choose their titles. We do get to have input, but we don't. I didn't choose the first two titles. So Before You Knew My Name and Leave the Girls Behind, as much as I love them, they were not my idea. So I also think Third Time's a Charm that I should get to call my third novel, the name that I chose. So Believe You Me, again, is a companion piece that will follow on a year after Leave the Girls Behind, which came a year after the events of Before You Knew My Name. It's also set in New York. There is a little moment in New Zealand as well. And it explores a different aspect of gendered violence again, perhaps no surprises, and it really rounds out I love, and you might have noticed this in Leave the Girls Behind, or when you read it, keep an eye out for all the triplicities, all of the number three, and I'm not normally somebody who pays attention to that, but for certainly of late, that's a triplicity has played a big part rather than duplicity. Triplicity has played a part in my writing, and so I love the idea of rounding out these stories about young women sort of on the cusp of really becoming, and the ways that they are grounded, or actually standing on the shaky ground of the trauma of things that have happened to them in the past. I'm not going to say too much more about it for now because I am fast approaching my deadline on this book, and all I can say that is I'm excited for you all to read it and to have those three books hopefully together on the shelf. And then I am super excited about going in a slightly different direction with book 4. As a library, we are always interested in authors and novels that formed a writer. Who and what did you read when you were growing up, and what effects, if any, did their works have on you? Okay, so I am a writer because I was a reader. There's no doubt in my mind, given also that I've had no formal or very little formal training when it comes to writing. I'm learning on the job, and I have been learning on the job since I started reading books at a very young age. My family, most of my family, are readers. Certainly my mum and my sisters. My mum reads a book a day at least, and I've been around that since I was a little girl. As a young girl, in terms of books that really sort of meant something to me, I just read everything. I remember going to the Waitara library. So I grew up in Waitara and Taranaki, and I went to the kids section. I can see it so clearly. The kids section was over here, and I would go and I would get at that age I would get books out, the same book over and over and over again. So I would get my favorite books from there, but then I would go to the adult section. I would sit on the floor and I would flick through books about the Russian Revolution. That was a big obsession when I was 7 or 8 years old, and World War II specifically. Nazi Germany. And so I would be 7 or 8 sitting on the floor cross-legged in the adult section of the Waitara Library, like flicking through these books. And that all came from things that I'd seen on TV. I had become obsessed, for example, with Anastasia Romanov, who had not died with her family, or been murdered with her family, the Russian royal family, as part of the Russian Revolution. So I guess there's my sort of crimey, true crime kind of self coming out there at an early age. I was also in my primary school, Waitara Central. I used to take out 101 Dalmatians, the book, all the time. And every time get so anxious about the puppies being stolen. And when I would read this book, even though I was reading it over and over, worried that that it was going to have a different outcome this time around, almost like Choose Your Own Adventure before I knew what Choose Your Own Adventure was. And another book, nonfiction, called Catastrophe, Calamity, and Cataclysm. And it's a book title I never forgot, and a few years ago was able to find online. And this was like 10 different stories of like disasters around the world, everything from, I don't know, the Great San Francisco fire or Chicago fire. There was a lot of fires back then. The sinking of the Titanic, things like that, to the kidnapping, of famous children that were held for ransom. So it was all an eclectic mix of catastrophe, calamity, and cataclysm. And I read that book over and over again, and I didn't realize then as well I was laying the groundwork for the sort of darker side of my personality, my need to look at something. I think, how could this have? Titanic's a good example. When I was little, I would get so obsessed with like, how could this have changed? Like, at what moment could this disaster have been averted for individuals and also collectively for everybody on that ship? So I think that's an insight into my psyche as a little girl. And then as I got older, I started reading all of my sisters and my mom's books, including hugely influential Shirley Conran, Lace. I'm not going to quote some lines from that right here, but that book was so influential because it was commercial in every sense of the word, a huge bestseller. It was also really beautifully written, and so I've never shied away from, and I never will, from huge commercial successes also being able to be beautifully written and compelling. And yeah, so from 101 Dalmatians to Lace, and then everything in between. And obviously I make an effort to read Pulitzer Prize winners and Booker Prize winners and all of those things as well, but my heart really lies with Lace by Shirley Conran. Question: how and when did you discover you wanted to be a writer? So I think I've alluded to this sort of through line through all of my answers today, that I was a reader, that I was always thinking about the world and disasters and how they happened and why they happened, and but also I was I think a storyteller but not a writer when I was younger. So something I've talked about a little bit is that in Waitara, my somewhat country town, I had a pony, and I would ride up into the countryside and I would just tell myself stories. I would write myself into TV shows. That was a big thing I used to do as a kid. Mostly Days of Our Lives. I gained another insight into who I was as a youngster, and I would pick up the thread of whatever was going on in a TV show, and then I would insert myself in as another character. So I really learned to tell myself stories, but for the longest time I didn't put anything down on paper. Because I didn't know how, because I thought that you had to be exceptional. You had to be these award winners. You had to be Alice Walker, Color Purple, in order to be able to write. You had to be born to write. And I think that's something that we often think when it comes to lots of careers that are high profile, whether they're sports people or artists of different types, that you have to be born to do that. And yeah, I think probably a couple of people are, like Beyonce, for example, probably born to do what she does. And certain writers, I mentioned Alice Walker, one of my favorite writers of the modern era. But the rest of us, we learn by paying attention, by reading, and eventually by getting out of our own way and letting ourselves be bad on the page for the first few edits. And as long as you've got a story to tell, this is what I discovered for myself. As long as I had a good story to tell, which I didn't have for a long time, once you get that story that won't leave you alone, then you have to stick with it, and it'll stick with you, and then you play with it for long enough, and then you eventually like what you put down on the page. So yeah, my journey to becoming a writer started by, as so many writers start, being a reader, being curious about the world, paying attention to the world, being a bit righteous about things that I wanted to talk about. And then a really huge part was getting out of my own way, and understanding that I did not have to be as and certainly not straight away as good as some of these writers that I was, returning to their books over and over. I just had to start, and if I worked at it, I might someday approach the level of talent that they have. So yeah, for anybody watching or listening to this who wants to write, it's annoying, but it's true. Just write, and you will get better as you go along. So thank you so much for thank you for the questions. Thank you for listening to me ask myself the questions and answer them. It was a unique experience, and I'm just always really grateful that I get to do this as a job, and that I get to communicate with readers and book lovers and librarians. I would not want to, but could not do it without you. Thank you. Bye.